you are going to drift towards things that are going to spell more outrage, spell more mindless viewing, spell more negativity, because as humans, you will watch those longer, you will engage with them more, even if you do it spitefully.
That is Brady Shearer. This is the Nook Podcast, and you are here for week 4 of the Maker series. Conversations with various creators from a handful of different fields. My name is Steven, and it is so good to have you joining me today. Before we dive into today's conversation, make sure that you are following this show on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss any of this. And if you ever have any questions or comments, drop me an email. The address is steven@nookpodcast.com. I've always got that listed in the show notes, along with a link to Buy Me a Coffee, which is a safe and simple way for you to financially support this show. For today's episode, I got a chance to talk to Brady Shearer. He is the head honcho at Pro Church Tools, which is a company based in Canada. Hey, the Nook is going international. I digress. Pro Church Tools is an organization whose goal is to help churches navigate all of the ways that they can stay in contact with their regulars, as well as keeping the message of the gospel out in front in the middle of so much digital noise. How's this for some interesting statistics? 95% of Gen Z, now that's the kids, yes, I'm old, I can call them kids. That's the kids who are 22 and younger. They are on YouTube like crazy. Only 2 in 10 millennials, now that's more like mid to late 20s up into early 30s. Only 2 in 10 of them consider attending church as important. And this one's really interesting. Adults over 50, this is my crowd. We spend more than 4 hours per day in social media. Now, why is this so important? Because our mission is to take the gospel, the good news, to wherever people are. So I think you're going to enjoy this conversation with Brady Shearer. Well, first of all, for context, Brady, give me an idea about who you are and what you have been doing with your business in working with churches for these years now.
Yeah, sure thing. So Brady Shearer, the name. I live in Niagara-on-the-Lake, which is in Ontario, Canada, about an hour south of Toronto. And I went to Bible college, studied to be a student pastor. So I have my degree in youth ministry, graduated around, 2013, 2014, around. There was a concrete day. I clearly can't remember it. While I was in Bible college, I had to do an internship, pretty classic, in post-secondary. And so I got connected to a new church plant in our city, and they gave me the title of media director. So they put a MacBook in my hands and a DSLR camera. It was a Canon T3i. And they're like, hey, we care about creative media here in this church, in this new church plant that we're starting. So we need you to create some videos and work with social media, communications, promotions within the church. And so I was really eager to get started with that. I didn't have those skills at the time, so I started picking everything up on the job. So I'm figuring out how this camera works, and we're shooting a vision video. We're making video announcements, baptism videos, testimonies for the people that are getting saved and committing their lives to Christ in our new church plant. And what happens is I start looking around to my peers at Bible college, the ones that would go on to be student pastors themselves or lead pastors in smaller churches. And I'm like, this is like early 2010s. I think this social media thing, I think this digital internet thing is for real. And I think that y'all are going to be the ones that are put in charge of that once we get into actual full-time vocational ministry. And then simultaneously with this, I was starting to realize that I did not have the relational bandwidth personally to be a full-time shepherd of people. I enjoyed it, but it was incredibly draining for me. And in a full-time context, I could kind of foresee and project, hey, I'm not going to be able to be there for people the way that they need to be shepherded. But I loved working with churches. And so it was this coalescing of different factors that led to the company that I run, Pro Church Tools. And it started as a humble blog. I basically just started teaching everything that I was learning. Same, we started a YouTube channel, a podcast. So I'd learn how to like navigate a camera, and then I made a series of videos on YouTube to teach other churches and pastors and leaders on how to navigate that same camera. Eventually, I got really enamored with the idea of online business. At the time, I was living in the most northern major metropolis in Canada. I now live in the most southern part of Canada, basically. A little overcorrection, you could say. And where we were living in Edmonton, I don't know if you've ever seen that show on Discovery, like Ice Road Truckers.
Yep.
Like they filmed that where I lived. Like 6 months of winter, we do not plow or salt the roads. It's like, get your 4x4 out. Not me. I got a 96 Chevy Malibu with like bald tires on the road. I'm hitting Cadillac Escalades on the way to church. It's a tough time. And I was like, my wife's working 2 jobs. She's at insurance in the day, retail at night. I am in school full time. I'm studying, but I'm also freelancing and trying to get this business off the ground. And I just remember saying, you know what? One day we're going to run an online business, and sweetie, you will be able to do whatever you want. You can stay at home. You don't have to get up at 5 a.m. Our car's plugged in. Like you have to plug your car in at night into an outlet, lest it not turn over in the morning. And so that inspired this idea of online business. Eventually, we hired our first employees. We jumped into the world of software with our platform Nucleus. Now we're 2 locations, one in Idaho, one here in Canada. Team of about 15 engineers, product designers. Still staying true to how we started, though, which is teaching churches how to, as we like to say, navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years with our YouTube channel, podcast, and all the free content. So that is the long answer.
Well, but I think it's a very necessary answer, because not only do you have that ministry piece, but you have that heart to help churches understand the importance of where we are right now. And it amazes me that in 2022, it still can feel like so many churches are running on square wheels where that kind of thing is concerned. And while I'll never be the guy saying that God caused COVID, I think COVID has been one of those magnifying glasses that I think has really had to help churches, or forced churches to move forward to say, we have got to figure out our digital footprint when so many churches are, have been through lockdowns and lockouts. And I as I understand it, Canada's still dealing with quite a bit of limitedness in folks getting together. So how much more important is it that, especially churches where you are dialed into this, and churches just being able to stay in touch with their people?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, sometimes it can be misunderstood because of the, type of content that I publish, that I think, in-person ministry can be replaced by online. And granted, COVID forced us into that for a season. And I'd say that was an imbalanced season, not ideal circumstances. From my vantage point, in-person cannot be replaced by online, but I also think the inverse is true. What we do online cannot be replaced by what we do in person, because even before COVID, the reality existed that there are 168 hours in a week. Church service is maybe one of those hours. Let's assume every person in your church attends every single week. We know that's not true, but let's assume. Right. That still means there's 167 hours beyond your Sunday service where people are now in the 21st century connected digitally at all times, meaning we have the potential to disciple folks, to connect people, to help them take more steps towards Jesus outside of our Sunday service. And it's true what you said. I mean, religion, healthcare, the government, like some of the slowest adapting institutions, public education, these institutions are such massively, they're complex, but they're also entrenched in tradition. And so turning these things around can be difficult. And like I said, biggest communication shift in 500 years, not only in the scope of how much things are changing, but how fast they're changing.
Yeah, big time.
If you think about pre-2005, the following tools did not exist. First of all, Google Maps. Like, we were printing out 18 pages on MapQuest, and I'm like in the front seat with my dad on page 13, like, the exit was there, and we got to turn around. Like, we didn't have any of the Ubers and the Airbnbs and the Dropboxes, but then also no, music sharing services, Spotify, Apple Music, and then no social platforms. So no Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Pinterest, YouTube was 2005. TikTok. So like now imagine all these tools that we use on an everyday basis, like 15 years ago, not existing.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine another time in human history except most recently, maybe the printing press, getting text into the hands of the everyday household instead of it being reserved for the elite. It's hard to imagine a time where we've experienced such massive upheaval across every single industry. Church is not immune. And like you said, COVID forcing us to maybe catch up and accelerate that pace of change in our local context where maybe we were dragging our feet before.
Yeah. Well, and that brings me to the big point that I wanted to kind of get your take on, because I know that you had put out a video some years back, pardon me, because I have watched your content for a while, that it can all be a bit of a blur. But even as much as we are engrossed in so much technology and such fast moving technology, as you just mentioned, there's still this element of, have we gotten so far away from the 101 kind of stuff? And you mentioned in that video back in the day, whenever that was, that you had found out that the simple search term of how to study the Bible was something that ranked very high on YouTube. And yet churches in general don't have that kind of content out there. What have you found? What have you continued to see with something where you are essentially kind of mixing the ancient and the modern, and that studying Scripture is so good for us as believers, and yet we rarely are taught just that very simple concept of how do we do that?
Sure. That content piece was from summer of 2020. So we're coming up on 2 years ago, and I'll get to that in a second, but if I step back a bit, just to explain a little bit about like the methodology behind what I encourage churches to do. Every one of our churches, we're all trying to accomplish the same thing pretty much. Two stanzas I think of, both from Jesus, the Great Commission, the Greatest Commandments. We might have our own pithy slogans in church, but essentially to distill it down, what we're trying to accomplish in our ministries is helping people to love God, love people, make disciples. And we have traditionally navigated that mission with our in-person events and gatherings. And that was because pre-internet, best way to get people connected to each other and to the gospel was in-person gatherings. I still say that, at least connecting to each other, best way as well. But now we have these additional tools. The thing is, when you have centuries, at least a century, of a single way of accomplishing your mission, that being in-person gatherings, you come to conflate the method with the mission. So we would consider, you know what, when you attend a service, when people attend our church, we have fulfilled our mission. Now, that's actually not true, even if we do tend to believe that. And this is just something that happens when you do something the same way for so long. You just tend to conflate these two things, these types of things. It's not really anyone's fault. But attendance as a metric is ancillary to the mission, right? Like just because you attend an in-person service doesn't mean that you are taking steps towards Jesus, becoming more like Jesus. To that end, attendance can only track if more people are coming to your church when you compare those that are coming versus those that are leaving.
Right.
In no way can attendance evaluate, are the people already in our church becoming more like Christ? Well, internal growth has got to be just as important as external growth, I would say.
Absolutely.
In our churches. So this barometer for life change, attendance, I would say, and this is one of my, big principles that really motivates everything else that I'll get to, even with that you queued this question off with. It's an antiquated and unreliable barometer. And I think it needs to be replaced. And what we encourage churches to exchange it for is something we call next steps. And the next step is any action a person takes towards loving God, loving people, making disciples. Think about those three stanzas: love God, love people, make disciples. They all start with a verb, an action. So that demands activity. It demands a next step. So attendance can be one type of next step, but we found churches have at least 20 that they should be considering as well, whether that be volunteering, giving, baptism, communion, prayer requests, praying for others, and on and on and on. If you go to our blog, nucleus.church/blog, I won't spend any more time on this now. We have a full guide on this called The New Rules for Church Growth. There's even a spreadsheet you can download for free and calculate your next step score if you're curious on that. So that gets me to your question, which is specifically, this was a YouTube study that we did. And what we found was every single month, and again, this is about 18 months ago, it's almost certainly similar today. Sure. And this data came from keywordtool.io, so you can do this kind of study yourself if you prefer. The phrase Bible study how-to was getting more than 500,000 unique monthly searches in America. So every month, more than 500,000. And when I went to YouTube and entered that search term, like, I didn't find any churches that were coming up in search. What it was, interestingly, was younger Christians that had like their own YouTube channels. So it would be like, hey, my name is Rebecca, and today I'm going to teach you how to read the Bible. And I read this translation, and I'm 23 or I'm 17, and this is my YouTube channel. And that was video after video after video. One conference came up, but 0 churches in like the first 20 listings. And what to me this illustrated was the fact that our churches are still so focused on getting people into our in-person gatherings. And we've seen this with live streaming in the last 2 years and just the explosion of that across virtually every church. It's like, okay, we need to get people into our services. We can't because of physical distance. Okay, we got to get them to watch our service. So again, it becomes all about attendance and replicating what we value most in person online. And my pushback has always been, okay, again, attendance is not the goal. Life change is the goal. And is the best way to affect life change getting people to watch your service from afar? I'd argue that there are innumerable better ways that you can affect life change online. Now, this requires us to think creatively. And frankly, this is mostly difficult because the senior leaders in our churches are on average close to 60 in America in Protestant churches. That's not a slight, and please don't hear that as a negative. What it does reflect, though, is people that are making decisions, they have served their entire life virtually in the church without digital media being something they've had to contend with. And now you see this massive upheaval in the world. It's very difficult for people at that age, generally, not always, generally, to navigate these kinds of things. And maybe this is what's contributing to our dragging of feet. And what I would say often is just backwards attempts at what we should be doing online. And that YouTube example is reflective of one of them.
Right. Well, and that's where I guess I'm having been a church attender for many, many moons, as well as somebody who worked in churches for about a dozen years of, how do we gear ourselves to where we can be very mindful of these channels that are available, but never get so far away from that very simple mission about life change and stop thinking about it so much in the way of a good friend of mine says, nickels and noses of well, that's the only metric that we've ever really had. I know it's a big boat to turn, but if we can get more churches thinking that way, could we not say that more of those personal life changes are to be expected when we try to engage folks more along those lines instead of just saying, watch what we're doing, watch what we're doing?
Nickels and noses. I like that. I haven't heard that before. I think what I would make as a disclaimer is that, I don't underestimate how difficult this navigation is. And I also don't underestimate, what I'm even suggesting. We have a singular expression of church in the West, basically. You got a sequence of worship announcements and message. It's very difficult to challenge that because the financial system that supports our churches basically indexes for that.
Yes.
And when you have a single expression of church, what that means is the people that attend church become accustomed with this is what church is. So you try to challenge that, frankly, that might not even be financially feasible.
Right.
Here's where I think we can begin to explore things. To take our in-person expression and then have that be our ultimate online expression as well is what's unsettling and frustrating for me. Because again, it's difficult to challenge what we've been doing. Our subculture has been doing the same thing for, let's say, 100 years. Very difficult to change that. You got generations of history. Online is brand new.
Yep.
Think of it as pioneers in a new land. You come to Canada, you're like, it's cold here. We got to figure it out. And we did. I mean, I couldn't, it was still too cold for me in some spots, but I found a spot here that's only somewhat cold. So same with the internet. We don't have generations worth of history there. So we can decide how we want to affect life change as churches on these platforms. How do we do that? Simply put, you follow the attention. Attention is the ultimate commodity online, and it is the prerequisite to affecting life change. You want to help people get closer to Jesus, you first need their attention.
Yeah.
And so what that looks like practically is going to platforms that have already earned the attention. Now, it's important that we have platforms that we own ourselves as churches, namely your email list and your website. But then, because it's a lot easier to get attention this way, go to where platforms have already earned all the attention and set up shop there. A physical parallel would be a mall that the owners of the mall are like, hey, we get 50% foot traffic of the surrounding area every month comes to this mall. And we're going to give you a free physical space. Want to set up shop here? Okay, that's pretty intriguing.
Yeah.
We have something similar with digital media. And so with platforms like Facebook and Instagram, but especially with platforms that are newer, like TikTok, that hand out organic reach like for free, which is really exciting right now, go to places where the attention is. I'll give you an example of TikTok specifically, because TikTok, you hear something like that, and if you're a pastor, you're almost certainly like, isn't that where people like do dances and stuff? And that's how every digital platform starts off, right, Stephen? Like we said this with Facebook. It's like, oh, isn't that just like MySpace? We said this with Instagram. Who wants to see pictures of people's food?
Right.
Twitter. I don't care about your updates throughout the day. Snapchat. Why would I post something if it disappears in 24 hours? TikTok. Dances? That's not my thing. Platforms start with a gimmick that gets the young people in usually. And then what these platforms have shown they can do is pivot to worldwide attention across every age group. And so TikTok now has robust platforms within its own platform for things like cooking and working out and car insurance and Microsoft Excel, like people with hundreds of thousands of followers, and all they do is focus on a singular thing. So there was this church, you can find them on TikTok, I Am One Church is their handle. The name of the church is One Church. And they had a sermon that they had recorded, and the topic of the sermon had to do with biblical wisdom for those that are single. And so what they did was they took their sermon and they chopped it up into 6 different 1 minute or less clips. And they would start off each video on TikTok and it would say, advice for single people, part 1. And then they'd jump into a point from their pastor that was sharing about this. And within that 1 minute or less time frame, they would share a complete point. And they found that they could chop up this sermon in particular into 6 different 1 minute clips. They posted them on their TikTok, probably not thinking much of it. Combined, those 6 clips earned this church more than 1.5 million views.
Wow.
And that is a perfect encapsulation, an example of what online can do that in person could never. You cannot have 1.5 million people, listen to your message in person. There isn't a single stadium in the world that you could even rent that would be big enough for that to happen.
Yep.
But online allows for that, and they did it for free. They didn't have to pay for mailers. They didn't have to put up a billboard and have 1.5 million people drive by it on one of the most popular interstates. No, it was distributed for free on TikTok. Why? Because they found something at the intersection between faith and culture. And this is the other key element to making the digital world work, is that you have to find content that's going to be valuable to people who are not yet connected to faith, or who are connected to faith, but want their faith to apply to their everyday life. The intersections between faith and culture. So advice for single people is an example of that intersection. And you might think, hey, like this, why don't we just share wisdom from Scripture? Look, this is the model that Jesus gave us in the parables. Jesus would take something that the entire crowd would understand. He'd start with talking about finances or farming, agriculture, and then he would use that as a springboard to then discuss the kingdom of God. Today, this church is doing the identical thing, intersection, faith, and culture. The distribution network isn't Jesus standing on a beach and talking to the people on the hill. now the distribution is TikTok.
Right.
So these are biblical parallels, essentially. We're taking our inspiration from Christ, both with our mission and in our method. And in this way, we can affect life change in ways that are truly meaningful.
Right. Well, and something you said that really sparked something for me, because I know that it's something that I've actually pondered again, having worked in churches and been responsible for producing some of this content, whether it's something completely separate from a Sunday type of thing, or a series kind of a thing, or like you're talking about just now, where you're using small bites from Sunday. Are we, the church, way too good at answering questions that nobody's asking, versus something like you just laid out, where obviously this is something that's going to ping ears literally worldwide when you talk about something that's in the now of singleness and Christianity, and how those two things now meet, and how do you navigate worlds within, that kind of a bracket? How do we get better at tapping into those kind of things? Is that a question that I can throw at you?
Sure. I mean, one really easy thing that I do practically with my own content is I will go to channels, individuals, organizations that I follow that I really like their content. And what I'll do is I'll go to their pages. You can do this on YouTube specifically. You can just go to their videos, and then you can sort by most popular. And you can see what kind of content is resonating the most with this audience. And I will then lift those frameworks and figure out, okay, if this is someone that's not in my own industry, I'm not going to borrow their subject matter because they're talking about fashion or fitness or cooking. But what frameworks are they using that people are resonating with? And then I'll do this with my own industry as well. So, I'll look and I'll say, okay, so this other channel that I follow, like friend of mine, a lot of the times when they post about live streaming, it gets a ton of views. Okay, well, live streaming isn't something I'm specifically passionate about helping churches with, but I do have some thoughts on it. So I'm going to publish a video on live streaming. And we did this past week on YouTube, and that video blew up, and way better than our other videos because I had done some good research to inspire it. And the reason I recommend going to channels, individuals, organizations that you already like is that with the internet, there are innumerable possible connections, obviously. You don't have to pretend and be someone else. And I think that's important. You might look at someone else and the way they teach the Bible, be like, oh, I don't want to go on TikTok because I'll have to be like them, and that's not me. I'm not suggesting that. It's important for you to be yourself and to lean into what you truly care about and communicate the way that you communicate. And we can all find those intersections between faith and culture. So if you're looking for inspiration, go to people that you follow online and you like, because it's likely that you communicate or would like to communicate in a similar way because you're drawn to that already. And then look at the frameworks they're using and look at the subject matter they're covering, and then create your own content that springboards off of that. And the more that you do this, there's this old short doc on online that has always been inspirational to me for this reason. It's called Everything is a Remix. And the idea is that there isn't anyone coming up with new ideas. All we're doing is we're taking this thing and this thing and this thing, and those are three inspirations for me, and I'm going to combine them into something new. And that's my own voice. And so that's usually the way that I do it. It's pretty simple. And what's important to know is that, my friend Sean always says, your first videos are going to be your worst videos. And even if you're not doing video, if you're blogging, if you're podcasting, it's not going to be great at first. TikTok for me was the first platform that came along that wasn't really for my generation. I'm 30. TikTok, formerly Musical.ly, that was for Gen Z. I'm a millennial. And so it took me a while to get comfortable on TikTok. It was rough at first. And so that's just how it's going to be. There's no way to avoid that. You got to just go through that learning phase. That's really true of everything in being an adult, right?
Yep.
Zero taxes. I'm going to figure out how to keep my house clean and figure out how to keep, my children on the right trajectory. Sometimes things are hard, and you can figure it out. I believe in you.
Yeah. Well, and something you say there really makes me, it kind of boils down to that thing of intentionality for me, in that Again, having worked in churches and produced some pieces that maybe had an initial plan, but then that plan changed. And it's like, well, we've still got this video. What do we do with it? And to have a pastor kind of flippantly say, well, let's just put it out on the internet. That to me is just, I don't know, the internet can become the garage. It's like, well, we don't know what to do with this, but we don't want to get rid of it. We'll put it in the garage. I think that our churches just need to be a little bit more intentional about it. I mean, at the risk of boiling it down to way too simple of a concept, is that not where we need to land? That figure out a strategy on what to do and how to do it better. To where these so many channels are truly something productive, as opposed to, well, we're doing it because everybody else is.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have our own podcast, the Pro Church Tools Show. It's a Q&A show. So churches send in their questions pertaining to all these topics. We provide answers. It feels like almost every other answer, I'm like, well, let's get back to the mission. And the reason is because we're still in this in-between period where we are not yet fully embracing the digital platforms that are available to us with a missional mindset. And I am empathetic to churches and understanding that 90% of churches in America are 350 people or fewer on the weekend, according to State of the Church, Barna 2016. So like the everyday church is being led by people, maybe paid, maybe not, wearing so many hats, likely not digital experts themselves.
Yeah.
So what happens when you have that starting point? You end up copying other people. It's like if you walk into the gym for the first time, you don't know how to construct a workout regimen for yourself. So you're either going to look at what other people are doing, you're going to follow someone online and copy their regimen, you're going to buy a program and copy that. Why? Because like you do not have the expertise necessary. And one of the issues with the social problems as they are, and this is where awareness on this specific problem is especially important. Only 8% of churches in America have average attendance over 1,000 on a weekend. And yet it's this small sliver, tiny fraction of highly visible and highly influential churches that we see the most online. And what this does is it can create these conditions for a distorted perspective to emerge on what the everyday church actually is like, what they should aspire to, and what they need. Because if we see these highly visible, highly influential churches, the ones that are on social, they're writing the books, they're on stages at the conferences that we attend, and we're copying their digital strategy. Well, that's like a local coffee shop that serves a small neighborhood being like, we should run our coffee shop like Starbucks. Well, no, you shouldn't. You don't need to consider the global chain and infrastructure that institution has. Sure, you're both selling coffee. You might think that you have overlap there, but organizationally, you couldn't be more different.
Right.
And so the same is true for the local church. If we're getting our digital strategies and we're getting our influence from these highly visible, highly influential churches, very much unlike us, largely popular on account of a highly charismatic communicator or a popular worship band, something that cannot be replicated in the local church, nor should you even aspire to it, frankly. If it happens, great, but don't aspire to it.
Yep.
To then take their strategies and then copy them into our own church, like that is a massive vulnerability, and you're setting yourself up for failure. And then what happens? You have folks that don't truly understand digital, which is not a fault of their own, that have copied organizations unlike their own, and thus not seen the results they were expecting. And what happens? See, digital just doesn't work for us.
Right.
This social world is just not for us. And then what happens? We don't navigate this communication shift, and how that ends for any number of churches. I mean, I don't want to speculate, but millennials, Gen Z, you grow up on this, you have certain ways of viewing the world. There will be churches that are left behind in that respect. We see our congregations aging, not reflective of the general population. We can spec out how that turns out by projecting down the line.
Oh yeah. Well, and in truth, in those instances, you sadly end up with churches who have effectively launched themselves into irrelevance. And it's not to just browbeat them and say, come on, get with the program here. But in truth, there is an element of that I mean, you can say aging out. The truth is that that's a church that's dying, not just the figurative, oh, our attendance is down. No, you've once grandma and grandpa pass away, that's two more people that are never going to be in that church again and not likely to be replaced because we don't have anybody with the mindset that says, how do we capitalize on using these tools to get back to loving God, loving others, and making disciples?
Yeah, absolutely. And in a global church perspective, like I'm not especially concerned about that. You go through massive shifts like this. Some churches, hey, look, not every church is meant to like exist forever. So some churches will close, other churches will open, and the gospel will continue to go forth. But if you are listening and you see some of these signs in your own church and you're like, okay, I'd like to try to navigate this digital shift. I mean, what are some of the things that you can do? Well, like if it was me and I'm going to the gym for the first time and I don't know what I'm doing, if I'm in the kitchen cooking for the first time and I don't know what I'm doing, okay, I'm going to plug into some people that are helping those new people figure things out. That's why we have our YouTube channel. That's why we have our podcast. That's why we have our free software tools that we give away at Nucleus. Like the point of these is to help you learn. Because in 2010, when I was handed a camera and at my church plant, hey, Brady, make a video for us. I'd never hit record before.
Figure this out.
I had never managed a social account before, and there were staff meetings where like they bring me in, they're like, why'd you post this on social? I was like, I don't know. Like it seems sometimes people post things that was a miss. Okay, well we learned and we don't do it again. Okay, right. like that's part of it. And the only difference is that I did that 10 years ago. And when I did it, I was 21. And so I had a little bit different perspective on it. But we both start from zero. Everyone starts from zero. Every social account starts from zero. Every YouTube channel, every YouTube video starts from 0 views. Like we all have that exact same starting place. And any one of us can figure this out. Like COVID might have forced you to figure some things out. But the truth about the human experience is that we are incredibly adaptable. But we love familiarity. And the less we understand something, the more likely we are to fear it. Yeah. That fear is usually unsubstantiated. It just comes from a place of ignorance, not ignorance in a bad way. Ignorance as in, I do not understand something. Yeah. And so my encouragement to these churches, like things might seem grim. Maybe they seem just a tiny bit grim. I don't want to paint it worse than it is. But you can figure this out. People your age, in your position, have figured it out. People older than you, younger than you, with more understanding, with less understanding, have figured it out and found a way to use these digital tools to affect life change and to align with the church's individual needs and goals as well.
Right. Well, and perhaps it's easy to sit and speak about the global church, and for that matter, to even try to gain the ears of church leadership. But I'm just curious if you have any thoughts about just how me as an individual, how so many of us, untold thousands of us that are users of these platforms, how can we be better at leveraging them to sharing our faith without being obnoxious, without being, oh my gosh, if that guy posts another picture of his coffee and Bible and highlighter to make it look like he's doing that every morning. But just curious if you have thoughts on how we can better share our own faith experience within these digital realms.
I would say the prerequisite before we get to that is individually making sure that we are tailoring what we're ingesting online and not letting the algorithms dictate that for us. Every one of us is going to drift if you are not intentionally deciding your trajectory online and telling the algorithms what to show you intentionally. You are going to drift towards things that are going to spell more outrage, spell more mindless viewing, spell more negativity, because as humans, you will watch those longer, you will engage with them more, even if you do it spitefully. And the algorithm will then go, I know how I can get this individual to spend more time on my platform by showing them more of this. And that can be corrosive to your soul. Yeah, it can. And so you need to make sure that you are telling the algorithms what to do by intentionally following, by intentionally unfollowing, by intentionally monitoring your watch time, what you're engaging with. You might think, I never liked that post. They know when you stop scrolling. So if you stop scrolling every time you see something that's drama, algorithms like, this person likes drama, give them more. And subconsciously, they're going to begin moving you. You're drifting to a place you don't want. And then, because that's what you're ingesting, that's the input, it's going to affect your output. And that is just like the bad part about social, because it's preying on the bad parts of human nature. So that comes from like the bad parts of our human existence. That's not social's problem. It's just capitalism saying, hey, get money by preying on this bad part of humanity.
Yep.
So we have to actively, as followers of Jesus that want to bring light into the world, not darkness, you have to monitor what you're inputting so that you can be better with your output. I noticed this was happening to me last year in a way that I didn't anticipate. Like I was following a bunch of my friends that were like really far leaning left. And I'm pretty far left myself on the political spectrum as a Canadian compared to most Americans. But it was like affecting my my work ethic. I don't even know how to explain this, Stephen. But it was like a lot of people just being like, in the COVID corporate world, being like, you know what? Like, I'm getting my check, and like, it's tough being a millennial. I can't buy a house. I can't move up. I can't, like, you know what? I just like, what's the point? It's just a lot of apathy. Yeah. And that was affecting my own work ethic as an entrepreneur. I haven't talked about this publicly. It's just like something I was like, I identify on. So what I did was I was like, okay, algorithm, this isn't even necessarily like I disagree with what people are saying or anything. I just don't think it's healthy for me right now. So I am going to actively tell you, algorithm, to show me different things. I made those adjustments, and it dramatically affected my perspective on work. And who would have thought that it could have made such a difference? But that input was affecting my output. So before we even get to like what you're posting and stuff, like I think the work that all of us need to do before that is monitoring the inputs.
That's huge. And maybe it's just because I can quickly flash back to when my children were much younger, and just the old song of "Be careful, little eyes, what you see." Sure. That you're right. And I realize that in the marketing world, everything is about impressions and how many times we can get our messaging in front of people, from corporate as well as personal. But in truth, that's just one of those old adages of, guard your heart. And I honestly, I think you're speaking from a very good point there, in that I can only pour out what I have poured in. So how much more critical is it that we are so much more mindful? And I realize to some that can come off sounding very prudish, and you're just not up with the times. But in truth, that still to me is one of those odd mashups of the ancient and modern, in that there's obviously countless amounts of bits of information that are available to us on any given day. But still, what is the most critical? What is the heart of who we are, and for that matter, the heart of who we're after? And I just feel like I could ramble at that point.
Hey, it's your show. I mean, go for it.
Well, thanks for the reminder. More than anything, Brady, I just I want to be very respectful of your time. This, as in so many of my interviews have gone, I kind of come into things with one expectation, and time and time again, God has just blown those things out of the water for me, and it ends up just leaving me in a very appreciative place that we could talk about stuff that's very much like business to you, but we never got away from the true heart of what you're after. And I thank you so much for your willingness to just kind of, throw the book open here and say, let's dive into this.
No, I appreciate the invite, and keeping that heart of what we do is important to us. It motivates all of our company's business decisions and dealings, and it, of course, motivates the content that we create. So it's hard to talk about one and not get into the other. We're trying to not just create content that educates, but also create products and distribute them as far as we can by making them free, that solve real needs in churches and push churches and their congregations towards more activity, more next steps, more spiritual practice.
I'm going to make an assumption that as a partaker of podcasts, that you are also a user of social media, at least to some degree. Our messaging, that's in air quotes, Our messaging as believers is important, and it's the same for our churches. I will borrow an old line as a reminder for all of us that we as believers are the only Bible that some people will ever see. I think it's important that we are intentional about our social media presence. If you happen to know a pastor or other church leader who can benefit from this conversation, please send them a link. I so appreciate any time that you share one of these shows. I have links in the show notes for Pro Church Tools as well as Brady's social media feeds. Give him a follow. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today, and I will catch you here next time in the Nook.
The Nook Podcast is a production of Sozo Digital Media.